if there was ever a time to be alive, I am excited about being on the earth right now to help with this transition, because this is really big. And to be involved in energy, I'm just tickled.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. In the days ahead, as we move into a post-carbon world, we're going to be looking to other sources of energy for electricity, for our heating in our homes. And my guest today, we're going to talk about some of those possibilities. I'm here in Mount Shasta with Todd Cory, who's a solar installer. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So, what do you do as a solar installer? What does that involve?
Well, let me back up if I can and talk about how I got into this.
Good.
I have a background in electronics, and I found myself living off-grid about 1985, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, there wasn't much solar, and what was available was very kind of basic compared to what we have these days. So I found myself researching and built my own system, and then started helping neighbors and friends with their systems. And that kind of evolved into doing it more professionally and getting my license and insurance and all that stuff. So now I do it kind of as a business, not just as a hobby to help people.
Yay.
Although I still do it because I feel inside like it's a good thing to be doing. It's not predominantly just for the money.
So your heart's in it too.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So when you install, go back to when you're off grid. Are you off grid now?
No, about 11 years ago, moved closer to town because it was an hour-and-a-half drive to Mount Shasta from where I used to live, and that got to be a big grind, and so moved closer to town. The very first winter I was in town, interestingly enough, I thought, oh, it's so great to have grid power. I don't have to worry about, all the stuff with a renewable energy system.
Right. Right.
And rapidly discovered that we have really unreliable power here. It goes out all the time, especially in the winter when we have our big storms.
Sure.
So after setting the timers, the clocks on the VCRs, and the digital clocks millions of times, I said, okay, I'm going to do a grid-tied system. So then I did a grid-tied system for my house, and got married, put a bigger system in, and worked really hard to get our house to zero energy. Are you familiar with what zero energy is?
I can only imagine. So what's zero energy?
Zero energy is where you generate all the energy needs that you have in your home. So in terms of heating water, electricity to run your lights and your computers, and heating your space, heating and cooling your space, all on site.
Okay.
So
I want to get this. Your electricity, your water heating, your home heating. Okay. How do you do this?
So the very first step, and I go through this with customers, and so I felt like I had to walk my talk and do it in our own house. And that was to reduce our consumption as much as possible. And so that means more efficient appliances, changing to compact fluorescent light bulbs, insulating the house, all those kind of steps probably a lot of people are familiar with.
We'll go back to that. I want to talk about conservation a bit more.
Okay.
But so you did that first.
Yeah, and then you get your consumption down to a point where you can meet those needs through renewables.
Okay.
Somebody figured this out. They said for every $1 that you invest in conservation, you save between $3 and $5 making that same energy from renewables. So in other words, the idea is you don't waste and then put in a giant system to compensate for the waste. You pick the low-hanging fruit first, you conserve, and then you can meet those needs.
This is a good strategy,
yes.
Right? So if what you do is reduce your, and about how much do you think you reduced your usage?
Well, we are very frugal, and I figured it out. We conserve, and we've reduced our consumption by about 70%.
Whew.
Now that's a lot. Most homes can very easily reduce their use by 50%.
Really? You can reduce half of your energy use.
Right. So when we talk about
conserving.
increasing prices in non-renewable fuels, the first thing people can do is stop wasting,
Okay.
and they can mitigate the effects of increasing prices that way.
I interrupted you. I want to go back to your house. So you
Okay.
so you reduced to about 70%.
Right.
Congratulations.
But you know, not everybody has to be super frugal. A lot of times when you're talking about conservation, you're talking about doing the same things just with less waste. So in the example of compact fluorescent light bulbs, you have a light bulb, it still gives you light. It just uses 1/3 of the energy.
Right.
So,
its
you know,
efficiency is
exactly. Efficiency is a big part of it. And then if you want to, like, you know, get more extreme with it, you can do that. But there's relatively simple ways that people can reduce their use. Now, here in Siskiyou County, we don't have any tax incentives or buy-down programs for renewables. And believe it or not, somebody who advocates renewables and designs and installs systems, I'm really happy we don't have incentive programs.
Why?
Incentive programs, as was proved in the 70s when we went through the first run of this, you know, when Carter was in office and we had the oil embargo
yeah,
and gas rationing and things like that. Incentive programs tended to make people do things for the financial payback. And so you had people suddenly becoming solar hot water experts, putting in systems like in my mother-in-law's house on the roof that was shaded all the time. It froze the first winter, flooded her house, and it gave solar hot water systems a really bad rap.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is that if you're thinking about sustainability, the real key is to not throw more resources at waste. You know, you don't put in this giant renewable system to compensate for waste and unconsciousness. You make those steps to reduce your consumption and reduce your waste, and then you can use a much smaller amount of renewables to meet those demands.
Just meet your needs.
I like the metaphor of going into an orchard. And if you go into an orchard, you're not going to get out the 15-foot tall fruit picking ladder and pick the fruit at the top of the tree first. You're going to go and you're going to grab the fruit that's hanging low.
Okay.
And in terms of return on investment, energy return on energy investment, so conservation is far and away the cheapest new energy we can get.
I love Amory Levin's little comment about negawatts, that conservation is, it's like you don't have to build any new plants, you don't have to put up panels on your roof, just conserving and efficiency.
Right.
So I'm going to back to your house.
Okay.
So the first thing you did is you reduce your demands.
Right. And you know, we can talk about all those steps if we have time, but it's readily available if people want to research that on their own. When one of the advantages of being able to grid tie, at least in California, the net metering law says you can be billed monthly, or you can be billed on a yearly basis.
Yes.
And the great thing is about yearly billing is you can take and put an excess of solar electric in for the summer and accrue a surplus.
Right.
And then you can use that to offset the winters here where we have very little solar.
Right.
So on a yearly basis, you can come out at close to
zero.
And that was when I told the folks, my friends that edit and put together Home Power, just live north of here a little bit.
Home Power Magazine.
Yes, Home Power Magazine, right.
Yeah.
They said, write an article on this. Nobody's done this before. So I put in, I got our consumption, and this might not mean a lot to some people, but we got our consumption down to 7 kilowatt hours a day.
Well, people need to know that that's about 1/5 of the average American home. At least as of a decade ago, it might even be now, you know, even less than that.
I think the average home uses about 30 a day.
That 30 to 35 is what we'd heard.
Okay.
So that's you're right. You reduced your amount 70-80% of the average American home.
Right.
Okay, so you did that.
And then we used to use kerosene for heating.
Oh.
Now the price per BTU of kerosene has gone up so much that it's about the same price as heating with electricity now. Remember when people used to say, "Oh, electricity is so
no way
expensive
to
to heat."
Yeah.
Now they're almost the same.
Kerosene is up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you know it's fossil fuel. So
Sure.
So what we did was I installed a heat pump. And heat pump, I get that. Everybody goes like, what's a heat pump? A heat pump's like an air conditioner backwards. Or everybody has a heat pump in their house. It's called a refrigerator. You have a side that's hot and you have a side that's cold.
Okay.
And in the case of a heat pump, the side that's hot is inside the house and the side that's cold is outside the house.
Okay.
So you're actually extracting heat from the air in the winter even and putting it in the house. And in terms of BTUs per watt, it's 2 to 300% more efficient than a regular resistance electric space heater.
Okay, now let me ask you this. The heat pump that you're using to keep warm air or bring warm air in the winter, and you just said last winter you had 120 inches of snow, so we're talking cold out there.
Right.
Still working for you in the winter?
Yeah.
More efficiently than electricity.
Right.
And more efficiently than kerosene, or at least cost-wise.
Right. Right.
How does it compare with something like propane, which is also fossil fuel, or wood?
Propane is the most expensive per BTU for heating. Kerosene and fuel oil are the next step down.
Right.
Wood is the next step down. And then heat pumps are actually the cheapest way to get heat. And in our case, so I remember I was saying we use 7 kilowatt hours a day to run the house. And then if we add our heating load, that doubles. So we use 14 kilowatt hours a day for everything.
So you're using 7 kilowatt hours a day for heating using electricity.
Right.
And your heat pump is a way of keeping that heat or bringing that
Bring it in the house. Right.
Okay.
So 14 kilowatt hours a day, you tell people that, and a lot of people are shocked that you can have a modern home with all the amenities for that little bit of energy.
For half of what everybody else
Now, I
does.
do off-grid solar systems, and those people know about conservation. They make us look wasteful. Some of those homes use 2 or 3 kilowatt hours a day. So
I make a confession is that we are off-grid. We have 24 panels. We use 3 kilowatt hours a day.
There you go.
But we don't try to heat our house with it.
Right. Yeah.
But we run the video studio, but not a dryer, and not excessive appliances. But back to you. Okay, so you've got solar for you conserve first, okay, and you're doing your heating through your heat exchanger.
Through the heat pump, right?
Heat pump.
Yeah.
What else are you doing? How are you doing?
Well, when I talk to somebody about doing renewables, they always say, my classic question I get is, how much would it cost to put solar on my house? And I say, well, okay, well,
solar panels for electricity.
Yeah, it's
right?
always electricity.
Yes.
Very few people think about solar hot water. And actually, number 1 is conservation. Number 2 is solar hot water systems. Now, solar hot water systems run about 80% efficient. In other words, you're getting about 80% of the energy of the sun and putting it into a usable form, where solar electric's about 10%. So in terms of low-hanging fruit, now you're getting up the ladder and you're going to pick some of the middle fruit on the tree. In terms of solar active renewables, that would be like solar hot water.
So instead of having a propane hot water heater or electric hot water heater or natural gas, whatever you have,
Right.
you invest in. So how much for, say, an average family of 4? How much is it going to cost them to do that solar hot water heater?
With the price of copper the way it's gone, panels have really gone up in price. So solar hot water panels are about $1,000 now for a 4x10 panel.
And how many of those do you need?
A family of 4 with conservation, you could probably get away with 1, but mostly that's sized towards 2.
Because you're doing
panels.
their own laundry and wash the dog and whatever
Exactly.
else.
So
that's not too
and you're
bad.
looking at probably around $6,000 for something like that. So
Installed.
quite a bit less than a solar electric system, as you know. If you live off grid, it's very expensive. So.
But it meets a different need. I think that's the really important point here, is what we're replacing is focil fuel.
Exactly.
Either in the form of how your electricity comes or in a gas version. So you're meeting different needs in different ways, is what I would say. So if you do the hot water heater, now I know that there's some people who have actually used solar hot water heating as a way to retrofit or build radiant heating for their home. So that would be another way that could be using that.
We do that a little bit in our house. So I was going to talk about it, but we do that. In the spring and the fall, we have a surplus of hot water. Yeah. In the winter, we don't.
I believe that. It's too cold out there.
Yeah, there's snow, and it's cloudy and gray, and But and you can't store solar thermal like you can store a grid-tied solar electric system. So in the spring and fall, we have an excess of solar hot water, and we have a small. It's basically just a coil with a fan behind it, and when the water gets above a certain temperature, it turns on, and we dump that excess heat into the house. So and that mitigates about 16 gallons of kerosene, so not a lot, but it helps.
It's a touch.
Right.
I mean, it's a piece of the puzzle. Because what I see is there's no one single fix that can do everything with great efficiency.
Right.
If you're going to be really efficient, you're going to have different kinds of solutions. I love that idea. We don't have that. We heat with wood, but I love the idea of using the hot water as a way to, when you have it.
And there's nothing
heat the
wrong with
house.
wood. Wood's a renewable resource. If
it
it's
is.
done in a sustainable way, wood is,
A highly
carbon
efficient,
neutral. It's a good way to heat, especially here.
Well, you've got a forest
you
everywhere.
know, it's a form of solar energy. The sun is shining, growing the forest, and it stores it, and then you burn it in the stove. So it's another form of solar power.
One of the things you mentioned to me earlier is that on the systems that you're installing for folks now who are grid tied, you're also including batteries, which is a different tact than some installers do. Tell me about why you do that.
Well, there's two kinds of solar electric systems. There's systems that use batteries, and then there's systems that don't use batteries. Most places, people put in systems that don't use batteries.
Because they could tie back into the
well,
grid?
you can grid tie either way, with batteries or without.
Okay.
They're just two different kinds of inverters. The reason most people go with non-battery grid tied systems is because if you have batteries, obviously you have a maintenance issue, watering them, and they wear out. They last about 12 years if you take care of them, and you have a little efficiency penalty. The benefit is, especially when you live here, is when the power goes out, you can smile because your power doesn't go out.
I have to look like the Cheshire Cat because since we're off grid totally,
Your power never goes out.
our power never goes out unless, I mean, it doesn't go out. And so
Right.
when people say, the power's been out for 3 days in town, we look at them like, oh, really?
Right.
Which is very nice. It really is. On the other hand, I will add that you've got the best of both worlds, I would think, if you've got battery
Absolutely.
and grid tied.
Absolutely.
So that you've got your emergency backup and storage.
And we don't know how energy and resource depletion is going to come down. We may have rolling blackouts.
Yeah.
It may not be for a long time. It may be, in
Maybe
5
next
years.
year.
Yeah, but if you have batteries, see, most people who have batteryless systems don't understand it until the first time the power goes out, and then they go, hey, what happened? My system doesn't work.
Actually, along that line of we don't know when, one of the folks that we've talked to in this spring, so we're at 06, here 2006, said that PG&E is saying among themselves that brownouts in August, which is our peak air conditioning month, are pretty possible in 06. They are certain in 07.
Wow.
Because we are reaching the maximum generating capability that we have from PG&E, which is another reason of why to go to the renewables.
Absolutely, and another factor in that is if people are not able to afford to heat their house with propane anymore, or fuel oil, or kerosene, and they don't have a wood stove, and the price of electricity for heating and the price of kerosene or fuel oil are the same or cheaper for electricity, people are going to be shifting to electricity for heat. That's going to put more demand on the infrastructure. So not just air conditioning in the summer, but winter heating loads are bound to go up.
I hadn't really, at the time we did our system in 1990, it was inconceivable to think about, for us, to think about heating, using electricity for heating, because it's not a terrifically efficient way to do heating.
Right.
So it wasn't even in our thoughts. But of course, what's happened in that time is that the prices of fossil fuels are going up,
Right.
and creating a more of a parity there. In the systems that you're doing with battery and grid tie, which I think really sounds like an ideal thing for many, many people for both the brownouts protection and also for heating, at least backup heating you could have for that.
And a lot of people, at least around here, have private wells. So when the grid goes down, they lose their water too, and that's a big issue.
That's huge.
And because of our seasonal moisture, if you're going to do any kind of agriculture, you've got to have either gravity water, or most people have wells.
Pumping,
They pump
so you
it.
have to pump it.
Yeah.
So are you setting up systems with DC well pumps, AC?
AC well pumps,
feed it right through the
there's
inverter?
again, we talked about efficiency. There's different kinds of well pumps. There's a well pump you can put in that is more efficient than the traditional submersible well pump, but it is AC. The older DC pumps, that was kind of something, it was a transition thing that happened for a while, and they tend to be a little bit problematic in terms of maintenance.
We found that.
Yeah.
We found that. Yeah. So, so we talked about conservation. Well, we talked about your net zero energy house. I want to find out how, how close are you to doing net zero?
Well, it was really an interesting exercise in design and then empirical proof. And the design that I worked out last year, we actually came out with a tiny, tiny surplus at the end of the year.
Hey,
so
good
it worked,
for you.
and we had an unusually dark and gray spring. So most people used more fuel oil. I mean, there's every year is a little difference, and different. And with climate change, what is normal anymore?
Right,
It's like 1 year.
That's for sure.
So, but in terms of what everybody else used, compared with their historical use and their average, it seemed like people used more fuel oil last winter. So I think we're okay.
Good for you.
So
You're really proud of yourselves.
And I got to give credit to my wife, because she's
Really?
a trooper. She believes in this stuff, and sometimes she's washing dishes in cold water because she doesn't want to use hot water. And so it's not always pleasant but that's how close we get to being extremely frugal.
I think there's something to be said for that. We too are frugal. We haven't got the grid as a choice, an option at all, and so the hot water that gets in the winter, I keep a kettle on the wood stove, and that's of course becomes the dishwater, and the dishwater, when it's done, goes in and becomes gray water to be used in the toilet, and I'm sure that for some people that feels like a huge inconvenience. What a hassle to do all of that. I mean, we collect our rainwater under the eaves, but what I find is that it makes me very aware of what those resources are, and it makes me very aware of the seasons and the physical world. And there's a delight in, let's see, it's raining today. We're getting a lot of clean water in here or there's a lot of sun out, so it's the time I'm going to wash the clothes because it's more efficient to wash them when the sun is out. When you get
solar or wind or any of the things, they tie you to the natural world, and suddenly you pay attention when it's sunny or when the wind is blowing, whereas you never did before.
That's right.
And I think that's why a lot of this is so big, because we're really talking about a paradigm shift where people are going from just coming in, flipping on the switch, paying the bill at the end of the month, to really consciously being aware of where that energy comes from and what's involved in it.
I think that point, that we getting more connected to our Earth and those resources, and to one another. I'm sure the cooperation that you and your wife had to figure out on how you do things brought you a new level in your relationship, I'm guessing.
Yes.
I mean,
it's a team effort.
Sure it is.
Similarly, we bought a Prius a couple years ago because we needed another vehicle, and we wanted something that was real efficient. And it's like a team effort. My wife, Michelle, will take the car to work, and it's like a video game, the little screen, let's see how high you get the mileage.
Yes.
And on the weekends, I get to drive it, and she'll say, look, honey, I got it up to 52 this week. And be like, oh, and then I'll drive it and try and get it a little higher. What a wonderful thing to have a game of seeing how efficient you can be and how little you can use. We delight in it, and some people probably think we're nuts for it, but that's our passion, and it feels good ethically. I sleep well at night, knowing that I'm doing my part, I'm doing what I can do, I'm walking my talk. And I think this is, when we talk about possible changes, with definitely cheap energy being gone. And that's why I'm a real advocate for higher energy prices, because it tends to make people a little more conscious about their use. So if it costs someone in their pocketbook, they maybe won't drive less or put in a compact fluorescent light bulb because it's the right thing to do. They'll do it because it's going to cost them to waste.
It's sad but true, perhaps.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
Is that I think that's going to be the one of the gifts in the rising prices in peak oil, is that it's going to we're all going to be looking for how can we be more frugal, how can we be more efficient, and for folks like you who are pioneering, or us who are pioneering that, you can say, hey, you can reduce it 50% really kind of easy.
Right.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I just want you to know, because if there's anything we haven't covered, I want to make sure that we have that that time. Oh, your Home Power article, when did it come out? That Home
That
Power
was,
magazine.
yeah, I believe that was June, July of 2005, that would be, right.
Because that's something that people can find probably on the internet.
Yes.
Because Home Power has been a wonderful resource to folks who are willing to go out and do some of that themselves on not just their own electricity supplies or their heating supplies, but when we were first involved with it, we subscribed for a while there. It's like people making all kinds of amazing, it's a real testament to ingenuity.
And the fun thing was that the people that started the magazine and to some extent are still doing it, they were inventing this stuff. You know, you'd have techie guys working up circuits to people to homebrew for charge controllers because there wasn't a good one in the old days. Now there's fantastic
there's
stuff.
There's some maturity in the field, but but there's still inventive people doing.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
I figure it's going to be that kind of creation that's going to come up with ideas for how do we power vehicles better and a whole lot of other things that we need to do.
And I don't, I'm not a big believer in energy fairies. I don't think there's anything that's going to come along.
Energy fairy? What is an energy fairy?
An energy fairy is like when you talk to people about resource depletion, they say, oh, someone will think of something to get us out of this mess. Those are energy fairies.
The energy fairy, a little magic being that shows up and says, here, you can trade in your gas guzzling cars for an energy fairy,
or
hydrogen,
you can continue your wasteful lifestyle with this new thing that's going to replace oil.
I see.
And I just don't see anything that's coming down that has the embedded energy
efficiency that we have.
Well,
I mean,
petroleum products, it's phenomenal how much energy there is in a tiny, tiny bit of that stuff.
Somebody reminded us, this gallon of gas, right, is the equivalent it would take for you to push your car 20 miles down the road. Think of that, 25, right? In just this little gallon of gas.
Yeah.
We don't have anything like that, nothing close.
Right.
Hydrogen is not that.
No.
I mean, hydrogen is only a battery of sorts.
Right,
it's a carrier.
and biofuels will never
the
do
biofuels,
that.
I mean, it's like, do we want to eat or do we want to drive?
Exactly.
I mean, so.
But if you talked about one thing that I want to say, if there was ever a time to be alive, I am excited about being on the earth right now to help with this transition, because this is really big. And to be involved in energy, I'm just tickled to be here and to be able to help people with this, to be able to research with the new technologies that are available, to help people learn how to conserve and use less. It's just a phenomenal time to be here.
You know what? We're glad you're here too, because we need all the Todds that we can. For everybody's sakes, thank you for joining me. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and you've been listening to Peak Moment, community responses to a changing energy future. Join us next time.